This is the fifth week in this message series, What is the Message? And I know it sounds really silly and repeating it time and time again, but I think it really is important for us to have the foundation of what Luke is trying to present as Jesus' message as we listen to it through this year C. Over the weeks we've touched firstly on the joy that God promises to those who are blessed by his presence. And we saw that in the story of the wedding at Cana in Galilee, when it could have been an absolute disaster and everything could have gone wrong. And suddenly Mary turns to Jesus and says, they have no wine. And even though Jesus made the comment, it's not my time yet, why worry me? Why? It's got nothing to do with me. Mary simply tells the servants to do whatever he tells you. And in a sense, when we read the scriptures as we hear the word of God over and over again, that's exactly what God is calling us to do whatever he tells you. Because what he is asking of us is not to be obedient to the laws, which was the prophets and the Old Testament people were telling us, but was taken to the extreme when the Pharisees and the Sadducees read the letter of the law to be so clear. Jesus was saying it is to be a place where you are expressing the love of God. And we hear about that as we listen to the letter of Paul to the Corinthians, our second reading during this time, where Paul is reminding people that they're called to be one body, one community. They're made up of one people of God. And all of the gifts that we have, all of the ways in which we're called to live, they're all the same gift. And God is inviting us to live that as love. He tells us that if we do things and it's not done based on love, then we're simply a gong booming or a cymbal clashing. It has no point. So right from the beginning, Jesus is telling us that around the covenant of love in a marriage, at wedding at Galilee, there is this whole call together of people being a people of love. We find that coming through again when we listen to Nehemiah reading to the people who have gathered on the forecourt of the temple. They had lost sight of what their relationship with God was about because they'd been in exile for 70 years. They hadn't heard the word of the law. And they were being told once again that this was the covenant that God made with his people, and it is a covenant of love. As I said before, sadly it became a covenant of laws, but it was ultimately a covenant of love. We heard how Jesus took that passage from Isaiah where he told the people that this text is being fulfilled even as you listen. What was it? Anointed to bring good news to the poor, to lift up those who are broken, to give sight to the blind, and to declare a Lord's year of favour. It was to restore people into the place where love was central to their lives. And so we have Isaiah being told later that this is my word for you. You are going to be cleansed of your sin, as the hot coal was taken from the fire on the altar and placed on his lips. Your iniquities are taken away. And when Isaiah was then asked, who will I send to be my messenger? He is able to say, here am I, Lord, send me. And it was because God had touched him in a personal way. And we saw that again when we listened to the passage from the Gospel of Luke that weekend, which was where Jesus was speaking to the people. And because they were so close to the edge of the lake, he saw the boats and got into one of them, Peter's. And eventually he told Peter to just go out and to cast his net again. And Peter did it. And we know that they caught such an abundance of fish that they needed James and John to come and help. Peter's immediate reaction was, Lord, please leave me because I'm a sinful man. But it was the personal encounter with Jesus that changed his heart. And Jesus said to him, don't be afraid. From now on, you will be a fisher of men. But it was the personal encounter with Jesus that changed him. Just as the personal encounter with God changed Jeremiah, just as it changed Isaiah, so too when we come to a knowledge of God in our own lives and in our own relationships, then something changes. We become a new people. I'm not saying that the scribes and the Pharisees, as they tried to live the law as they saw, but they saw it from a very blinkered way. They saw it as being obedience to the letter of the law. And God is calling us to have the law of love as our primary foundation. And once we have that law of love, then we become a new people. And today we take a slightly different turn, as we see from the Gospel of Luke, but also from a reading from the prophet Jeremiah, that there is a very different way of living from against the way of the world. Jeremiah says that the way of the world is going to bring destruction and emptiness and brokenness. But then he tells us what will happen if we turn to the Lord. He says, a blessing on the man who puts his trust in the Lord. For with the Lord there is his hope. He gives then some very simple examples that the people would know, would tell them of constancy and trust. He says it's like a tree that sits by the waterside and thrusts its roots into the stream. When the heat comes, it feels no harm. Its foliage stays green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never ceases to bear fruit. When we trust in the Lord, there will be an abundance. And that's the challenge. God's message is that when we walk in his path, we will be filled with joy and with the love that he promises, and we will have them in abundance. But we live in a world where those things are not always accepted as the first way of people's lives. People live out their faith constantly challenged by the things that happen around us. Paul senses that same kind of struggle in the people of Corinth. As we listen to that reading today, he tells, if Christ raised from the dead is what has been preached, how can some of you be saying that there is no resurrection from the dead? And then he goes on to argue against the illogicality. He says, if for the dead are not raised, Christ has not been raised, and if Christ has not been raised, then you're still in your sins. He's saying that if we doubt that very basic truth, then sadly the rest of the story falls over. If we believe in the resurrection, then we believe in the love of God for each one of us, a love that embraces us in spite of our brokenness. So rather than focus on the problems that Jeremiah and Paul speak about, when relying on a human understanding of the gospel, Jesus presents us with this different view, which is Luke's announcement of the Beatitudes. Luke is different from Matthew. Matthew has 8 blessings. Luke has 4 and then 4 woes. For Paul, he sets forward a social justice statement rather than simply the Beatitudes. Jesus looks at the world, its fickle and fallible power, and rather than say trust no one, he rather affirms those who take what might be called an uncommon approach to living out the Bible. Fully aware that he may be speaking in riddles, what Jesus says is, blessed are you when you are poor, hungry, weeping, or hated. He's speaking then and now to a humanity that tends to equate good fortune with God's blessing. We know that there are many in our world who live under that sense of a gospel of prosperity. If I do things for God, then I'm going to be blessed with riches and wealth and with happiness. We know time and time again, we've heard that God speaks words of comfort, but he doesn't make us or let us get comfortable. God's words are a cause of tension for us. And if they're not, then I wonder whether we're actually hearing what God is saying to us. At their core, Luke's Beatitudes contrasts illustrate the distinction between the way of the world and the need for us to be aware that we belong to a community of God's people. Jesus' Beatitudes describe the happiness that can be known only by people who hold the common good so highly that they're actually scandalized by poverty and by indifference. They remind us that we human beings need each other, so that the only wealth that matters in the long run is the richness of loving relationships. Our very humanity suffers nourishment if only even one person goes hungry in our world. I remember hearing many years ago someone say that if I do one good deed, then the world is a better place. If I do one harmful deed to another person, then the world is a worse off place. Most of us think we can't change the world, but in fact we can. And we change the world when I take notice of one thing that is wrong and strive to make a difference. And that's what Jesus is saying in the gospel today. He's saying to us that if we strive for genuine happiness, it will be because we are with those who are in fact weeping, who are in need of healing, who are in need of protection. If we're looking for joy in our world, it's because we're looking to help those who are broken, to give hope to those who are hopeless. If we want to have love in our world, it is because we reach out to those who are uncomfortable or afraid of being loved. Last night after Mass, one of the parishioners at Kingston came up to me and said in all his working life he'd only ever been reported to higher authority for one occasion. He'd been an assistant principal in a Catholic school, and they wrote a letter to the director of Catholic education to say, complaining about him because he was too Christian. The people who are living the gospel are going to be accused of being countercultural, because when we live the gospel, we're living in a way that is different from the way of the world. Because so many people in our world today want to have or buy happiness, or want to have or buy comfort without concern for those around them. You can have comfort, you can have wealth, but your concern must first of all be for those who are without, to seek to be the face of Christ to others. So my prayer this week is, as Pope Francis has reminded us, that we'll be aware that our world is a one-world place. In his encyclical Laudato Si, the subtitle of that was our care for our common home. And so we are called to be people who are concerned not just about what I want or what I need, but rather how does my interaction with other people make this world a better place. And I pray that we'll be able to see Jesus in everyone we meet, so that what we do makes a difference and how we live brings new life to our world.